was living in Connecticut, had been there for 10 years with his wife and family, selling insurance, I think, looked at TV, became enraged by what the Americans were doing in Afghanistan and Pakistan, went to Pakistan to try to get some training, was trained up a bit, but not very well or not well enough, came back, filled his SUV with explosives, parked it in Times Square, was meant to explode it, but was unsuccessful. So here you have a situation in Pakistan where, as the arsenal grows on one trajectory, the stability of the society declines on the other trajectory. And as you try to think about the Libyan situation today, imagine Libya was happening in Pakistan. So I would say the stability of the global nuclear order. Al-Qaeda. Well, Al-Qaeda hadn't been heard from lately. Bin Laden, where is he? Nobody knows, okay? But most likely, as I say, in ungoverned Pakistan. Here's 9/11, we all remember. Here's a bomb design that Al-Qaeda's been working on. This was taken from one of the camps in Afghanistan after the Americans overran them, where Osama had been prior to 9/11. And here is just kind of an image of a Dragonfire bomb, which was a project that I describe in this nuclear terrorism book, where the US government believed a month after 9/11 that Al-Qaeda had successfully got a couple of small nuclear bombs out of the former Soviet arsenal and had brought one to New York City and was about to explode it. So that's described in the introductory chapter of the nuclear terrorism book. So another way to think about the question of how serious is this risk is to ask, what are the people who've had to bear responsibility, shoulder responsibility for dealing with it, what do they think? Bob Gates says, there's a lot of things he worries about, but when he wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks things can be worse, he thinks of terrorists with a nuclear bomb. George Tenet is reflecting the view, which is the mainstream view at CIA, which is that where Osama bin Laden and his operatives desperately want to go is nuclear. They're into killing in large numbers and theatrically, and what is more theatrical or larger number than a mushroom cloud enveloping a city? And here's Jim Jones basically saying the same thing. So just to help concentrate our minds, and I know this for many of you will seem too incredible and for others maybe seem too frightening, but I think this is just realistic. So I imagine that the Dragonfire plot was real. It turned out to be a false alarm. And that terrorists had a small nuclear bomb, the size of one of these, this podium here. They put it in the back of an SUV, drive it into Times Square, blow it up on a workday. Okay? So everything in the red zone disappears instantaneously in this huge release of energy, 540,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and melts everything, vaporizes it actually. So everything there disappears. And everything out to the blue zone, which includes the tunnels and the bridges, looks like the federal office building in Oklahoma City after a homegrown American terrorist bombed it back in 1996. So 500,000 people could die in such an attack in New York, because it's a highly dense environment on a workday, and another several hundred thousand die, over the next week from fires, radiation poisoning, and the fallout. For Abu Dhabi, if New York seems too far away, I gave you a target chart too, which is on the sheet. Again, not to be frightening, but just to say most of the buildings would not survive, I would say, and most of the people wouldn't survive. So in the nuclear terrorism book, I have two parts. Part one, which is the bad news, part two, which is the good news. And I'm going to do this very, very briefly. Part one says, on the current track, if everybody just keeps doing what we're doing, this is going to happen. That's the bad news. Part two says, this didn't have to happen. Nuclear terrorism is a preventable catastrophe. In fact, the subtitle of the book is called The Ultimate Preventable Catastrophe. And what that means is that we know a feasible, affordable agenda of actions that if we took them would reduce the likelihood of this to nearly zero. Some of which we're not taking at all, some of which we're not taking fast enough. So again, just in a nutshell, in the book I outline a global strategy, a global strategy for preventing nuclear terrorism, organized under a doctrine of 3 no's. The happy fact about nuclear terrorism, I would contrast this with, let's say, bioterrorism, is that on the supply side, there's a strategic narrow or choke point that if we choked it tightly enough, would reduce the likelihood to nearly zero. Because the happy syllogism that says no fissile material, no mushroom cloud, no nuclear terrorism. So all we have to do as an international community to prevent nuclear terrorism is prevent terrorists getting the means for their deadliest aspiration. Fissile material comes in only 2 brands, highly enriched uranium and plutonium. Neither occur in nature. So making highly enriched uranium or plutonium is a huge undertaking, multi-billion-dollar, large footprint undertaking. Only states are going to do this, not guys in caves. Okay? So the only way terrorists are going to explode a nuclear bomb somewhere is if they get a bomb that a state made, or if they get material to make a bomb that a state made. So the task for the international community is making sure to deny terrorists the means, the nuclear material or bomb, for their deadliest aspirations. How to do that? In this, I argue, a doctrine of 3 no's. No loose nukes, every nuclear weapon everywhere in the world locked up as good as gold in Fort Knox, or as treasures in the Kremlin armory. As human beings know how to lock up things we don't want people to steal. Second, no new nascent nukes means no new national production of uranium or plutonium. And in this, I congratulate Abu Dhabi as its civilian nuclear plant forswears any creation of enriched uranium, that's enrichment, or reprocessing of plutonium. If the world was to behave like that, this one you would put a check by, okay? Unfortunately, the world has not all agreed to this. But I would say Abu Dhabi has set a great standard in that regard. Finally, no new nuclear weapon states. This was written in 2004. That meant not North Korea. So we've already got one bad exception in this story, and we're at risk of having a second with Iran. So I would say that's once through lightly. This book was written in 2004. One of the happy things that happened to me was Warren Buffett every year has this, what he calls the capitalist jamboree in Omaha for his Berkshire Hathaway board. And he chooses one book and he says, okay, this book is going to be the book for the year. So he called me up and he said, I've chosen your book for this year. Watch it on the Amazon charts to see what happens, when he makes this announcement there. And as he would expect, you get this big uptick. So that was good news for this. This book is available in paperback now, and so if you're interested in the nuclear terrorism topic, I would say it's still extremely relevant, but I would read it in the context of the foreign affairs speech which I handed out, which basically says, look at these systemic trend lines as they are impacting the global nuclear order. So that's once over lightly, and I'm happy particularly to take points of disagreement, so don't feel obliged to agree, and I'm happy to try to answer questions on everything related to this topic. So please.
My name is Hanan Al-Hosani, an aerospace student at Khalifa University for Science, Technology, and Research. It's my pleasure now to introduce our moderator for the question and answer period, Dr. Michelin Ishay, a professor of international studies and the author or editor of numerous widely read articles and books. Among her many duties as a professor at Khalifa University, she is running Khalifa University Distinguished Speaker Series on Science, Technology, and Society. It's with great pleasure that I would like now